Precious, I think the government is the government presentation of the repayment is meant to create a very positive narrative where it's actually positive that you are meeting your obligations. But we need to put this in context. Precious, the period when we paid, the loan we took from IMF was an amortizing loan. So we've been paying it down since we took it on a quarterly basis. As at the end of last year, we had about 2.4 billion we're owing IMF. End of this year, we had about 800 million we're owing IMF after paying off the COVID-related loan. We have been paying it down each, like I said, it's an amortizing bond, so it needed to be paid on a quarterly basis. So we've been paying it down. We're paying each maturity that was due, and we honored it. So it's actually nothing to thumb our chest to say, look, this is a sign of fiscal health. Because if you consider the fact between September last year and December last year, the federal government, we borrowed about $2.754 billion. Of that amount, about $2.2 billion was from Eurobond issuance, 2.2 billion. We borrowed from among the multilateral agencies about 480 million from African Development Bank. We borrowed from China Exim Bank, and China, I think Infrastructure Bank or what. We borrowed another 300, between the two of them, we borrowed another $354 million. In that same quarter, we are referring to that we paid about 447 million to extinguish the COVID-related IMF loan. So it's actually nothing to thumb our chest. It's just that we met our obligation that they fell due, and we also borrowed additionally. We borrowed a total of $2.754 billion in that singular 3 months period. And we are thumbing our chest that we used part of this money to pay $447 million. So I think the government need to place this in proper perspective. It was a matured obligation that was an amortizing, but you need to pay over a period of time, and we were meeting the obligation that they fell due. But we also borrowing much higher than the amount we paid back.
Does this have any significant implication in terms of revenue to debt servicing ratio?
No. Bear in mind that our total debt in September last year was about total external debt was about $43 billion. Total external debt at December this year, last year, was about $45.7 billion, which means we saw an increase, like I said, the increase of $2.754 billion. We saw an increase, which meant that our interest payment obligations also increased, our debt service obligation increased, our debt to GDP ratio increased. So we really can't say that our debt conditions have improved because we paid back the IMF loan. In the summary is that we have a higher debt burden. Total debt in Naira terms at the end of last year was 144 trillion Naira, or $94 billion, up from about $88 billion it was 3 months earlier.
So, Mr. Chukwu, because again, when people look at this whole, this narrative or this particular news that came, a lot of people said it was victory, and not just for the country, but for this administration. But you have said it is an obligation that we had to meet, and so it shouldn't be seen as a victory. But it's just in terms of the long-term gains that this administration promised when it comes to its reforms, have we started to see any one of them, and can this be seen as one of them?
It certainly is not one of them. We can dwell with the ones we have seen gains, but certainly paying obligation that previous government have been paying as they fell due, and borrowing 10 times. Okay, let's assume you paid $447 billion, but you borrowed $2.754 billion same period. So which was multiples of the amount you paid, cannot be seen as part of the victories unless we are saying that the government had no commitment to pay matured obligations. But let's dwell with the victories that we've had. The decision by the president to remove the subsidy was a bold and courageous measure. It may have had unintended consequences. The decision to harmonize the exchange rate was a bold and courageous decision. It may have had unintended negative consequences. Probably the way they were done, maybe they could have done in a more subtle manner. But these were bold decisions that the government achieved. until recently when Donald Trump now started what he called Freedom Day and introduced it's introduced duties, import duties on almost all countries. We were seeing the first quarter of this year, we saw improvement in a lot of our macroeconomic variables. We saw stability in exchange rate. We saw Naira appreciate even at the parallel market rate window to about 1,536 Naira to $1. Improvement over from about 1,600 Naira to $1. We saw that improvement. We saw inflation, though after it was rebased, we saw inflation moderate. Part of that moderation was based on the rebasing. We saw GDP grow last quarter of last year at 3.84%. We saw a consistent improvement in GDP growth rate, and we saw overall GDP growth rate at 3.4% last year. These are what you may call wins. Unfortunately, many of them will now be tested by the crisis that Mr. Donald Trump had triggered in the global economy that has led to near collapse of crude prices to about $60 per barrel. Unfortunately, we have not materially improved our crude production. We're still in the region of 1.4 million barrels a day. So, but I've read out some of the what you may call gains, but certainly paying debt that previous governments were paying as they fell due, and borrowing materially. Part of the, I believe, if you consider the fact they borrowed $2.754 billion and paid $47 million in the last quarter of last year, we will actually say that they paid partly from borrowed funds. So I don't consider that as a victory, but I think it's a narrative that the government want to spin. But we also have only an obligation to ourselves and the country to present the facts as they are. The government is doing a lot of things in some of the areas. We are areas we can call wins, but I don't think a country paying its obligations to the IMF and borrowing much higher than that, what it paid, should be a cause for celebration.
And I've also listened to some analysts who say that because we have now paid, perhaps, or repaid this loan, perhaps this creates, this will boost investor confidence, especially because the president has taken an economic approach to his foreign policy, trying to get in foreign direct investment into the country. Does this in any way improve investor confidence?
Precious, I'll tell you that investors are very discerning. Investors have the skills that you and I have that we are discussing this in this program. So investors will not be taken by positive spins. But investors, like I said, investors were excited investing in local currency debt instruments as we saw Naira appreciating. So, and those appreciation were related to what the government was doing, particularly what the monetary authority was doing. So I think we can give credit to government that the first quarter of this year, they stabilized the exchange rate, and we are able to achieve such level of confidence among foreign portfolio investors. And we saw a lot of capital flow into the economy in the first quarter of last year, even in the last 3 quarters of last year. From February last year, we saw the central bank increase discount rate on treasury bills to help stabilize the exchange rate. And it worked because we saw huge inflow of foreign portfolio investment into the economy. So that we can give the government credit. And that's what the investors are looking for. They're looking for a macroeconomic environment where inflation is moderating, exchange rate is stable, there is liquidity in the foreign exchange market, obligations due to external and local parties are paid as and when due. So that's what investors are looking for, not a positive spin. I clearly can tell you that there's no foreign investor who will consider that your loans due from IMF and we are due for payment, we are paid. No investors will consider that a part of the plus in terms of achievement of any government. But like I said, I've not ignored. I've actually emphasized repeatedly areas where the government has done well, areas that create positives for the government among foreign investors. Those are areas that includes the boldness to harmonize the exchange rate, the boldness to take out subsidy, the aggressive offer of treasury-based instruments and open market operation instruments to local and foreign investors at yields that attracted foreign portfolio investors, which led to stability in exchange rate, the ability of the central bank to honor foreign exchange obligations as they fall due, and the fact that the central bank is even considering the 2.4 billion that was earlier considered as unacceptable, unapproved by central bank for payment to that is forward deals, forward transactions that they now want to pay off. Those are what engender confidence to investors.
Mr. Joseph Chukwu, right now it seems that attention has shifted towards one, security, because of the challenges in that regard, and then attention has also shifted to politics. We see a lot of defection, we see a lot of talk about 2027, but less about the economy. There's also a gap in information compared to when this administration first came on board. But just talk to us about where we are in terms of the fiscal and monetary policies. Are we seeing gains? Is anything going on? At what point will it begin to trickle down and then ease the burden that Nigerians are bearing at this moment?
Okay, let's look at the latest report from the Bureau of Statistics, where we saw inflation at about all-item inflation, that's consumer price index, at 23.71%, down from about 24.23%. If that becomes a trend and continues, it will be a positive. Also, bear in mind, we saw a drop in food inflation to about 21.26%, where for a very long time we've not seen that food inflation materially lower than all-item inflation, as well as lower than core inflation. So, if that trend continues, it simply means we are seeing improvement in food production. It could be because we are still largely in the we have not moved fully into the farming season. This is still, we have a lot of maize, a lot of cereals that come out of the farms now that people are enjoying. But on average, on a balance, a lower food inflation rate is a positive for the government, because that inflation rate is driven by food production. So if you begin to see a consistent decline in food inflation, I think Nigerians will, in not too distant future, enjoy some relief, considering the fact that about 48% of our household consumption is on food. If you now add the section that what we call accommodation and restaurant meals, then you will see, and that also saw a lower rate of increase. Then if you look at month-on-month inflation in the month of between April and March increased by only 1.8%. The preceding month-on-month, which was between March and February, was about 3%, 3.06%. So that's also a positive. So it says that even the increases we are seeing on a monthly basis, comparing each 2 months, it's also declining. So those, for me, are the wins. Unfortunately, our vulnerability has further been exposed by the actions of Donald Trump that brought down crude prices, and that's why we're seeing pressures in exchange rate today. We saw exchange rate go back to about 1,635 naira as of Thursday, down up from where it closed at the end of March, about 1,520, about 1,536 naira. 1,536 naira. So it has gone back to about 1,635 naira because of the uncertainties created by Donald Trump, because these are all indications of the vulnerability of the economy. But by and large, one would say the gains, the vulnerabilities expose us to a fallback or to retrogress or lose some of those gains, which the government must do everything to make sure we don't lose.